Welcome to the nervous system. The word to know is homeostasis. This is keeping internal conditions balanced, relatively constant, even though the environment changes. Homeostasis requires all organ systems to work together. An analogy is the temperature in a house in the winter. So take a look at the diagram. Homeostasis in your body is very similar to this. So if it gets too cold in the winter in your house, the thermostat is set to a set point, maybe 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And if it gets below that, the thermostat or control center clicks on the furnace or the heater. So the heater heats up the house, and this increases the temperature in the room. When the temperature gets above the set point, the control center turns off the heater and the room cools down. And again, starts over again. If it gets too cool, then the thermostat clicks it on again. The nervous system controls and coordinates functions in the body and responds to internal and external stimuli. There's a lovely picture of your nerves in your body, the whole nervous system. The basic unit of the nervous system is the neuron. A neuron is a nerve cell, and these neurons are cells that transmit impulses, an impulse being a message or a little electrical signal. This is a typical neuron, and we're going to look at the parts. So this is one cell. The cell body is right here. It contains the nucleus and most of the cytoplasm of the cell. A dendrite are those branches that come off of the cell body, and they carry messages or impulses to the cell body. The axon, which is this long part, it's the longest part of the neuron, and it's actually that purple part underneath the yellow, that long part. It carries impulses away from the cell body. The myelin sheath, that's this yellow part, and it covers the axon. It's like insulation on a wire, and it makes it so that the message can go even faster. Very important. Nerves are made up of a few to thousands of neurons. How does a neuron transmit the impulse? Well, first of all, the stimulus or chemical or physical signal must be strong enough above a certain point, so above a certain strength called the threshold. When it gets strong enough, then the neurons are activated and the message starts to flow down the neuron and then down the axon to the end of the neuron. A chemical signal tells the next neuron to send the message. So we have to have a strong enough impulse, strong enough message to begin with. Then it triggers, flows down the neuron to the end. But when it gets to the end, the electrical signal can't just jump across to the next neuron. A chemical signal has to be sent, and the electrical signal in the one neuron triggers that chemical signal so it can trigger the electrical signal in the next one. And let's take a look at where that happens. So this is a synapse. Those circles in the picture, those blue circles, are where one neuron ends and the next neuron starts. And that space right there, that location, is called the synapse. And there is a little tiny gap in between the end of the one neuron and the beginning of the next. Since an electrical signal impulse cannot cross the gap, the chemical is sent, and that chemical is called a neurotransmitter. When the neurotransmitter gets to the next side, this triggers a new electrical impulse on the next neuron, and so it goes. dominoes. There are two parts of the nervous system. The first part is called the central nervous system. It is the brain and the spinal cord. They're protected by the bone called the skull around the brain and the bones called vertebrae around the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system are where the nerves go out into the body. So they take information out and bring them back in. The spinal cord has 31 pairs of nerves that branch out, and they connect the brain to the rest of the body. Now we're going to label the brain. These are really important parts: the cerebrum, the brainstem, the thalamus, and the cerebellum. We're going to be talking about one more as well. Let's look at the first one. So here's a diagram of the brain, and the first part is the cerebrum. They call it the cerebral hemisphere here. And it's the big part, the thinking part of the brain, in charge of intelligence, learning, judgment. And keep in mind that the right side controls the left side of the body, and the left side controls the right side of the body. Kind of cool. The cerebellum is way back here in the back of the brain, and it's kind of a round part, fairly big. And it's in charge of muscle coordination. The kind of cool thing about this, if you look at a squirrel's cerebellum, it's huge compared to the rest of its brain because it is in charge of balancing on wires and jumping from one branch to another. That's the most important thing for a squirrel, is its cerebellum. For us, the cerebrum's more important. Okay, so now the thalamus. Thalamus is the brown structure in the picture. It receives messages from sensory nerves and relays them to the cerebrum, so you can realize what's going on. The hypothalamus, the light blue part, controls hunger, thirst, fatigue, anger, and temperature. Also controls the pituitary gland, the master gland. And finally, the brainstem. That's the part at the bottom there. It connects the brain to the spinal cord, and it regulates blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing. That's it in a nutshell.